guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, I inherited my family's house after my parents passed away, and my douchebag of a neighbor claims that he now owns my dead parents' property and locks me out of it. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. The title story starts like this. People can classify bad people in a bunch of categories. Personally, I think one of the worst are the kind of people who prey on tragedy, to use it for their own gain and not caring about anything else in the process. An example of this kind of person is my neighbor, a complete psycho who, for the moment my parents died, tried to jump on my house. I cannot legally use his real name, so I'm just gonna call him Jim. Sorry to all the Jims reading this. So basically, my parents were driving home from the movies and a drunk driver hit their car. They were killed instantly, and suddenly I was left without a family. I was an only child and the house and everything went to me based on their wills. The house was old and I think my great-great-grandfather built it all by himself, or at least that's the story I was told. I was living a few hours away, but when I got the news and sorted out taking time off of work, I wanted to go there. To sit in my childhood home and feel close to my parents while mentally dealing with the whole thing. It did not feel real, more like I was in some kind of movie, and going to the house would help me. I had a key, but when I tried using it, I found that it didn't work. So I tried the back door, but again, the key for that didn't work either. I saw movement inside of the house, which was odd, and for a moment felt like maybe I was in some bad horror movie and should just run. Instead though, I knocked on the door, and who do you think was at the door? Well, I mean, Jim is the only other person in the story, so it was of course him. Me, what are you doing in my house? Jim, it's not yours. The owners died, which means it's abandoned. Nobody was living here, so I invoked squatters' rights and changed the locks so nobody like you cannot try and pull something. Me, what are you even talking about? You have a house right there. You cannot just claim this one belongs to you. Jim, yes, I can and I have. As long as I stay put, you cannot do anything about it. And even if I leave, I have keys and you don't. At this point, I started crying and screaming incoherently for him to get the hell out of my house. And of course, to keep my parents' names out of his mouth too. He was never a good neighbor to them, and he was talking about their death like some non-event. I could not handle the crap that he was saying, and my emotional state did not seem to affect him at all. He doubled down about not leaving and told him that his rights extended to the entire property. That I better stay away or he can use force to make me leave. Then he threatened something along the lines of I should leave because he would just hate for the entire house to go up in flames. That was a clear threat to destroy the house that I loved. Once I calmed down, I went and filed a police report for Jim, basically stealing my property and then threatening me to stay away. The problem is that squatting is very complicated here in the US, and they cannot just go and force him out of their home without going through a bunch of hoops. The police report was a good first step, but I also decided to contact a real estate lawyer to explain that I was being denied access to my inherited property. The process of getting him evicted was started, but he really didn't want to leave without a big fight, including again contacting me to threaten and harass me. He told me that if I got him arrested, he was gonna find and hurt me the moment he got bail. My lawyer was able to get me a restraining order against him due to fear of violence and safety. The police went through the process to get him evicted from the house, which took about 2 months total. When they did go in and force him out, he was resisting like crazy and trying to scream police brutality, when all they did was actually handcuff him and get him into the back of a car from what I gathered. I was not there to see it firsthand, just heard the story in court, and now Jim was being criminally charged for trespassing, breaking and entering, harassment, threats of violence and resisting arrest. A lot of charges, but most of them were minor. Large enough to cause him to face actual prison time though. However, not enough that would normally cause bail to be revoked. That was until they took a look at Jim's past criminal history, and it turns out that he had a long record of various breaking and entering charges, assault charges and destruction of property. Again, nothing so crazy that bail would be normally revoked aside from one factor. He had in the past skipped out on his bail and did not show up to court. That made him a flight risk and he was now going to sit in jail until trial. Because Jim of course was pleading not guilty and wanted to take it to trial. The DA destroyed him. I was not there for the entire trial, just the days that I had to testify and make statements and stuff. The only defense that he had was claiming that he had squatters' rights because the house was abandoned. Then going off topic and talking crap about my parents until the judge ordered him to shut up because he was out of order. In the US, a homeowner has the right to enjoy their property without threats of violence or harassment. He was not squatting on my land but instead just stealing it because it was not abandoned. It was empty for a few days, but legally, I owned the house. Squatting, I believe, mainly applies to when the building is actually abandoned and either has no owner or the property is owned by the bank or something. I might be wrong on that, I'm not a lawyer or anything. His defense just fell apart and then he tried to change the story for squatting to that my parents gave him the land. Just with no paper trail and no mention of it until his other story fell apart too. It was not convincing anybody in that room, especially the jury. He almost got held in contempt of court because he would not shut his dumb mouth up. He flat out said he wished he burned the whole thing down because I did not deserve to live in it. I feel like I don't even need to mention that he was found guilty on all charges. I could not imagine a single member of that jury thinking that he was innocent. Hell, he even admitted to doing most of the things, and it didn't matter if they believed that he was in the right or not. It was just if he did it or not. Because he escalated things to such a degree and he had a past history, he was now being sent to prison for 2 years, and now he didn't think prison was gonna happen, and I could tell by his face. He figured he was gonna get a slap on the wrist or something that he probably got in the past. Well, this time though, he was getting a real punishment. I could get back into my house and clean the absolute mess that he left behind. Most of my parents' things were luckily left alone, and I could finally start to grieve and feel the emotions about their death. I was exhausted at this point, needing to deal with Jim after an already traumatic event. I had the house and I was happy about that, but it was a little bittersweet because I was still sad about losing my parents. I hope if Jim gets out and tries to move back next door, he will leave me alone. But then again, ripe stars, I hope for OP that Jim never comes back. People like Jim just never learn their lesson, no matter whether they go to jail or prison or not. Anyway, the next one is an Am I the A-hole story. And by the way, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and maybe even post a comment because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much, and the next one starts like this. My wife's sister was recently found guilty of dealing to support her habit. She'll be sentenced this week and is looking towards a long term because this is not her first time caught dealing. She has 3 children, 2 boys 4 and 5 and a girl 14. No one on her family side wants to or is in position to take the children except for me and my wife. However, I'm demanding 2 conditions. If we are going to take the children in, I want us to adopt them. I don't want 50 people looking over our shoulders trying to tell us what to do. If we are going to be legally responsible for them, I want to be able to parent them as we see fit. The second condition is that I'm willing to take the 2 boys but not the girl. The 2 boys have not had any rules in their lives and are terrors, but they are still young and can be taught right from wrong. However, the girl has gone past the point of no return. She's been suspended from school several times for things like fighting and smoking illegal substances on school grounds, and she once dated a 22-year-old with her mom's approval, and they all lived in the same apartment. That did not last long, and now she is dating an 18-year-old who is a gang member. He was arrested when he was 14 on a home invasion charge, but was released because it was his first time arrested and his age. This is just a mess, and we've been arguing about it for a week. I don't want to risk our financial and personal security, but my wife argued that we cannot just throw her away. At this point, we are not even sleeping in the same bed anymore, but I'm not willing to open our house up to the girl and her lifestyle. Update: I left out a lot of info because I was in shock and I still am. We are both in our late 20s, have been married for a little over 2 years, have no kids, and I just graduated with my advanced degree last year. Last month we were talking about maybe having kids when we are in our mid-30s and about where we want to go on our Christmas vacation. Last week my wife came home and sat me down and told me that we are taking in 3 kids. I know nothing about adoption laws, CPS or anything related to raising children, much less troubled children. I knew what was going on with her sister and was told my wife's parents were going to take the kids in. Apparently they decided they are too old to take care of 3 kids. Of everyone in her family, we are the most financially secure and have a house, so when everyone backed out, she volunteered without asking me. That was the crux of our argument until I realized that it was happening with or without my agreement. That's when I told her that we can take the boys but not the girl, which started another round of arguments. I've never raised any kids, so I know I cannot deal with the baggage that the girl will bring into our lives. I can't even begin to tell you all how shocking the whole thing is. Sometimes I feel like I'm outside watching my life spin out of control. I want to thank you all for your insights. and the people working in CPS and/or the legal system. Your advice is extremely helpful. And then a user in the comments gave this very thoughtful comment. As a social worker for CPS, cautious, not the a-hole. But you need to tread carefully because your demands may not line up with reality. 4 and 5-year-olds raised in a chaotic and traumatizing environment will absolutely have some behavioral problems which you are relating to running wild. That may not be as easy to fix and they will need extensive therapy. Whether you adopt them or not will not be up to you. You can ask it, but you won't be able to demand it nor expect it. It will be the choice of a judge. Based on how much or how little the parents comply with CPS requirements, how long the prison term is, etc. I would expect that you'll be fostering the kids for a minimum of 12 months before you're allowed to start adoption procedures, depending on where you live. And yes, the courts and social workers will be up your rear during that time, and 6 months after the adoption takes place, you need to think about that as a reality before commuting to these kids. Signing adoption papers as soon as they come to your home will not be an option unless both parents agree. Clear it with a judge, lawyer, psych evaluations, etc. It just won't happen that way. Where I disagree with most Redditors though is about taking in the 14-year-old being inappropriate. If you don't feel that you can care for her, you shouldn't, but that shouldn't stop you from being a resource for the 2 kids that you're capable of protecting. I have been a long-term foster parent for children of friends and family, and I've done short-term foster care for kids in my office anywhere from newborn to 17. A 14-year-old with gang affiliation, substance use, major trauma and behavioral concerns is not something most people with good intentions are equipped for. You cannot just love and therapy all of those issues away. This kid sounds like she needs a higher level of care than you are equipped for. So you are not wrong for recognizing that you cannot give her what she needs. She needs an experienced parent with trauma-informed skills and a ton of one-on-one attention. You are not an a-hole here for having this boundary and understanding your limitations, and any social worker would tell you that. However, do be prepared that taking the boys will not be as easy as you can imagine, and you will not be able to demand adoption. If you take them, it will be a trial run, heavily supervised. And maybe adoption happens later. Reconsider your plans based on that knowledge and decide if you're still willing to do that. Also, call your social worker. You may not be interested at all once you see what the plan will look like. Final update to the story. It's been a while and I decided to update since I saw some people are still reading the post and asking about my situation, so I ended up leaving the house and talking to an attorney. Originally, I just wanted to insulate myself and my assets from any damages that might be caused. However, after talking to her about our state laws and talking to my family, I moved out and filed for divorce. I still love my ex and knew she would be financially strapped taking care of 3 kids, so I signed the house over to her, so at least she'll have always a roof over her head. I don't know the exact details, but the following is what I heard through friends. My ex got a temporary guardianship of the kids. She moved the kids in and registered them at the local schools. The niece was suspended several times. My ex and her niece got into some heated argument about her skipping school and letting boys into the house while the ex was at work. The niece and her friends cleaned the house then of all valuables one day while my ex was at work, and then they left. No one knows where she is at. Her family thinks I'm the devil and things would have gone much smoother if I stayed and helped her, and apparently her father and male cousins will rip my head off if we ever run into each other. With 3 kids in the house, I figured my chance of having our children went down to 0. I know it will sound selfish, but I want my own children. And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Do you think OP was the a-hole here, or did he do the right thing? Let me know what you think. And yeah guys, I just wanted to say happy birthday to user Amanda Rose from Patreon and YouTube. She has been a very loyal subscriber and follower for over 4 years, and I just wanted to say happy birthday and thank you so much for the amazing support. Let's wish her a happy birthday in the comments. And the next one is an absolutely amazing XXL revenge story, but since it is so long, you might want to take out some popcorn. Anyway, it starts like this. I've worked in marketing for 7 years since I graduated college. That entire time I've worked for one company. I haven't been the best employee, but I've been nowhere near the worst either. Middle of the pack, just where I like it. I don't make waves or bring attention to myself, I just do my job and I go home. I am one of only 3 females in a male-dominated department of about 15. My job basically entails courting big brands into choosing our agency to create their advertising campaigns. Lots of spreadsheet work, profit projections, boring stuff for people not in the industry. And well, I was in the industry and I am bored just typing a general description of it. The entire time I was with the company, Dan was my boss. Dan is a mid-level manager who reports to the vice president of the entire company. There are 5 other Dans in the office, all of whom run their own departments handling their own big clients. Dan is the typical former high school or college jock who never made it to the pros, so he takes out his aggression in the office. In some instances, aggression in the office can be a good thing, all that testosterone driving towards success. But in Dan's case, it just made him a jerk. Like I said, I was middle of the pack my whole career. I never aspired to get promoted, but over the years I noticed Dan promote all sorts of people around me. For those who clearly did more and better work, it made perfect sense. There have been some total losers in my department over the years though, and seeing them get promoted was kind of funny. Like I said, I wasn't ambitious, just did my job, so I did not resent those employees who were not as good as me earning more. What I did resent was getting blamed for their mistakes or being used as a scapegoat if our department did not secure as large a contract as we wanted. For example, our partnership with X brand might be for a whole year at a certain price, whereas our company wanted 2 years at a higher price like some other departments got with their clients. If I did something mostly on my own, Dan made sure credit was shared with the whole department. That's cool. But if the entire team did not do so well, he would single me out or single out some other poor schmuck to take the rap for the whole thing. Dan would then write an after-action report where that person got the lion's share of the blame and eventually got fired. Whether our team exceeded its goal or not, Dan would make sure he and his favorites got fat bonuses. One thing Dan believed in was going out on team-building lunches. At these lunches, the team made sure to be on our guard. Only 1 drink apiece, watch your tongue, that sort of thing. But Dan would always get roaring drunk and would say all kinds of non-PC stuff. Dan's favorite thing was guy jokes. I mean, guy humor. The other 2 girls in our department seemed to like that sort of thing and didn't mind. I minded, but I kept my big mouth shut because I didn't want to cause any trouble. Well, eventually, a friend of mine from another department came to me and he told me that he overheard Dan and my friend's supervisor, talking about who was on the chopping block next. Evidently, my friend was about to get fired and I was about to get fired too. My friend tells me he heard Dan saying that he would fire me after I made sure to make him look good at the next presentation we were making for a prospective client, a huge brand from Asia. The presentation would be in a month. My firing would be a week after that, and then Dan would hire a friend of his just out of college to take my place. I trust this friend because he's been with the company as long as me, and we bonded early over our love for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I geek out over that show even though it's slightly before my time. We would talk all the time about how hot some of the guys on that show were. Well, anyway, until my firing I was to continue slaving away collecting marketing reports, whining and dining the clients, being charming, and prepping Dan's PowerPoint presentation to the clients. I got a good friend in HR, and on a lunch date a few days later, she told me that it was true. I was one of the names submitted by Dan for termination in the near future. She swore me to secrecy and I promised I wouldn't say a word, but I also made her promise that she wouldn't say a word about what I was planning. I remember how much of a jerk Dan was, in that he wouldn't even let me take my 2 weeks off to get married 2 years ago, even though I requested it several months in advance, without making me feel like a lazy jerk. Meanwhile, he would sign off on his buddy's vacation requests without batting an eye, even if they would come to him last minute. He has always been a jerk to me, and part of me suspects it might be because I never took him up on his offer to take me out after work or chat me up on a personal level from years ago before I got married. I had just realized I was pregnant with my first kid when I dreaded eventually having to ask Dan for my maternity leave. This job really was not making me a happy person anyway, and my husband makes a fine salary and has always told me it's perfectly fine for me to take time off to be a stay-at-home mom for a few years or even permanently if I want. Well, I've always done my job effectively, done well on performance reviews, never off the charts good, but always well above effective rating. Even when Dan, the failed tight end, was reviewing me, he had to play nice because an HR rep would be in the room. Growing up with 2 a-hole brothers who are now wonderful people, one teaches high school English and the other is a chemist, I knew a lot about the classic mousetrap stink bomb trick. The one where you superglue a stink bomb ampule to the cheese area of a mousetrap and set the mousetrap so that when the trap is triggered, it crushes the ampule and releases the fart and rotten egg smell. You glue the mousetrap itself to the bottom of a small oblong box, usually a shoebox. The trap is glued on one end of the box's inside, on the other side you put a tennis ball and then you seal the box. You make sure that for storage the ball stands in a tall way with the ball on the bottom and the trap on the top. When you're ready to use the stink bomb, you lay the box gently the long way so that the ball gently rolls along the bottom of the box near the mousetrap. The idea is that if the box is jarred, the ball will move around, trigger the trap, and then you get the stink bomb smell. My brother told me it's usually for putting in people's cars, that once the cars started moving, the natural momentum would spring the trap. My plan didn't involve cars, but the trap would still be fine. I decided that I would ruin Dan's presentation with a stink bomb. That would be annoying, but it wouldn't really be revenge for 7 years of him treating me like crap and making me do all this work that ultimately he took credit for. And then gave himself raises for. So for the next 4 weeks, 3 times a week, Dan and our entire team would be that obnoxious group of office workers you see at Chili's or Red Robin or whatever mid-price sit-down restaurant you have near you that's a step up from Denny's. And of course, per usual, Dan would talk about what loser people in other departments were and how the company was nothing without him, how the boss's new wife was hotter than the previous wife and how he made both of them happy. We all knew he was just messing around and bro-talking, whatever he was doing with all his drunk talk. I thought maybe upper management would be a better judge than me. I thought of just emailing the best audio files to them. And well, I didn't mention before, but I had gotten into a habit these last few weeks of quietly hitting record audio whenever Dan decided to tell off-color jokes, sex jokes, or make fun of differences between black and white people, how funny it sounds when Asian people speak English, and so on. My friend from another department who was also on the verge of getting fired helped me change a lot of the audio files on Dan's upcoming video presentation to his most classic sounding soundbites of making fun of Asian people, black people, telling sex jokes, etc. The visuals stayed the same, but the audio track was completely changed. Officially, Dan's dull-witted friend was in charge of creating the presentation, and he and Dan would take credit for the whole thing. The reality was that I was supposed to create the whole thing, make it a smash hit, and get fired without getting any credit for it. Every day I was supposed to submit my work to Dan and his friend, and they were supposed to give their okay on my work. But over time they realized I produced good work and they didn't even bother checking what I was doing. They did, however, send their confirmation to their bosses that they were completing their presentation. Since they didn't want to share credit with me, they excluded my name from their reports. Our presentation room for the client is about the size of a classroom. It's basically like a private theater in a mansion. Our clients were about a dozen Japanese men. There is a movie screen on one end with a podium beside it. Dan was supposed to make a speech at the podium and then show how approachable and cool he is by pacing up and down the stage in front of the screen to really sell our agency's services and then take a seat while the video climaxes the show. The video is projected from behind a glass room, like a movie theater in back, and a projector is connected to a laptop beside it. The projector shows its image through a glass window. That projector room has one door accessible from inside the theater, and it has a deadbolt lock, though it's never locked. Another door leads to the rest of the building. We are on the 8th floor. Only the custodian has the key. Dan had a remote control where he would click a button and the presentation would start. Without Dan knowing, I had the projector changed to a different model that wouldn't read his remote but the remote I was holding. There were like 5 different projectors available on the projector room. The plan was supposed to be that Dan would press his button, the video would play its 3-minute length, and that would end our pitch to the client. My plan was that I would press my own remote at the same time as Dan. Well, Dan goes through his nauseating presentation, really kissing a lot of butt, and the clients are watching him speak. He finishes his pitch and then on cue, pressing his button. As I planned, I press my button. Oh, I ought to have mentioned before, but I had got my hands on a copy of the custodian's key without anyone's knowledge, and I deadbolted the projection room door. The first minute of the presentation goes as planned, the correct audio playing about how our company is so wonderful. Dan is lulled into security and relaxes at his seat. Then the fun part of the audio starts, where Dan tells a lot of racist jokes, makes fun of how Asians talk, how he screwed the boss's wife, how the company was worthless, and how he was the best employee. Dan panicked. Practically screaming, he runs to the projection room only to find it locked. The whole team, especially Dan and the doofus who claim credit for my presentation, are wondering what to do. They are trying to usher our Asian guests out of the room, but oh no no no. They find it fascinating. Oh my god, just when things couldn't seem to get any worse, I opened my briefcase that I've been carefully carrying around like an egg. I made sure not to actually set the mousetrap until I was in the room earlier during the meeting. While Dan was droning on, I opened the box in the darkened room, pulled back the mousetrap, closed the box and waited. And now was my chance. With Dan and his crash test dummy friend now screaming for something heavy to break the projection room window, I kicked the box down the slanted theater floor. Only seconds later, the entire room fills with a horrible stench of fart and eggs. The video's over anyway, and everyone rushes out of the room during the confusion. But not before Dan threw a chair through the window and broke a $4,000 company laptop. Understandably, everyone in the office was wondering what the hell happened in the conference theater. The Japanese businessmen were livid and complaining to the big boss about having their time wasted by a recording of Dan being racist towards them. And of course bragging about how he had sex with the boss's wife. They then left and took their business elsewhere. Dan was immediately called in, together with his underling. In the presence of an HR rep, they of course instantly tried to blame me for the whole fiasco. The boss then asked them, according to my HR friend, "Why are you trying to pin this on OP? Every day for the last 3 weeks, you and Crash Test Dummy Minion have submitted reports saying only you two were working on the video presentation that was supposed to cap off the show. Are you admitting to fraud?" Needless to say, both of those losers were fired. One by one, my whole department was called into the HR office with the main boss to be interviewed separately. Including me, of course. We all said we had no idea what all of that was about. Everyone admitted that the audio recordings which survived the broken laptop screen were genuine, but no one could place who recorded them. All we knew was that one of us did it. The 13 of us who remained, 10 guys, 3 women, were in a group interview with the boss, and he thanked us for exposing Dan and his main underling. He told us that he wished we did it in a more constructive way, but that it was a positive thing that Dan was exposed for costing the company business. We were all to be given raises. In the general aftermath of everything, no one really asked about the stink bomb. The custodian simply cleaned up the discarded box later that day and no one mentioned it. Custodian's cool and knows how not to be a narc. He took back his key, no questions asked. I really think the stink bomb was not necessary to get Dan fired though. I just thought it would make his destruction more funny. My new supervisor is a much nicer guy. He hired my friend from the other department to join his after I resigned. HR told me that if I let them lay me off, I could collect 6 months of unemployment. I of course took it because I don't think I'll work in that field again, but in case I do, I got letters of recommendation from the boss and new supervisor. Dan of course knew it was me who sabotaged his career. He has seen me around town before and knows I go to this cafe not far from where I live. One day, about 3 months after it happened, he saw me sitting at a table alone. He came up to me looking like his failed jock self and said, "You think you're pretty smart, don't you, you effing bee?" Then he started to approach me like he was gonna use his physicality to intimidate me. There were lots of witnesses, mostly elderly. Luckily for me, my husband came out of the bathroom just in time to see another man looking like he was threatening me. Happy ending, Dan had a broken nose, and no, I'm not gonna press charges, officer. 200-foot restraining order though? Yes, 7 senior citizens stayed behind to tell the police a husband, himself a former football jock, but now a quiet research scientist, was defending his wife. Give it up Dan, you lose. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, I am not jealous of OP for being in such a terrible work environment, but I am jealous of OP for coming up with such an amazing revenge. Honestly, to come up with a plan like this, you have to be a genius. I would say this is so good that it probably could be on Netflix. Absolutely amazing story. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.